Shalom, shalom. Giving honor and praise to the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. This is due to the fact that there are some brothers and sisters who say that Israelites only read the Bible. So we just want to show what we call Library Challenge Part 2. I have a book here. This book is entitled Black Cargoes, A History of the Atlantic Slave Trade, showing the fact of what happened during the slave trade from all the way in the 15th century all the way into the 19th century. So this is a good book for reference concerning that matter. Next, I have a book here, brothers and sisters, entitled The Penguin. That's the name of a book publishing company, entitled History of the World by Roberts. And this right here is a very good book concerning if you want to sit there and go into world history. All right? Next we have here is a book entitled The Sumerians, Their History, Culture, and Character by Kramer. So just want to sit there and have that to be shown. This is a very good book for edification purposes concerning the Sumerians. All right? So just let that be noted and understood. Next I have a book here entitled Rome and Jerusalem. Now this right here, brothers and sisters, gets into the fact that the children of Israel, that is to say at that time called the Jews, mainly of the southern kingdom that remained of the tribe of Judah, was still in the land and fighting for their rights and claim to that land. So that's what that particular book right there, brothers and sisters, gets into emphatically. All right? Next we have here a book entitled The Slave Trade, all right, written by Hugh Thomas. This is a college reference book, and right there it gets into, similar to the other book that we showed called Black Cargoes, it gets into that kind of subject matter concerning the slave trade. But this one here gets into it much more in depth. All right. So just want to sit there and have that to be shown for edification purposes. Now, what we're going to do, brothers and sisters, giving a shout out, you know, understand, to my brother Danyala, we're going to go into reference material, very, very brief, not much. We ain't going to be doing much teaching in this, but just going to go into reference material concerning some type of subjects that we want to sit there and talk about. All right? I have a book here. This book is entitled The Ancient Near East, edited by Pritchard. Now, brothers and sisters, in that particular book, I want to go to page 231. All right? This right here is part of the translation of the Merneptah Stela. The princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Not one raises his head among the nine bows. Desolation is Tehenu, Libya, Kati, the Hittites is pacified. Plundered is Canaan with every evil. So when you got some brothers and sisters saying, oh, they can't find Canaan on the map, you need to get your studying up. Carried off as Ashkelon, seized as Gezer. Y'all know is made as that which does not exist. Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. Huru is become a widow for Egypt. Who are all these different people that's mentioned in the Merneptah Stela if all black people want to sit there and claim Kemet, this, that, and the third? The point of me reading that goes to show you that the ancient Egyptians themselves acknowledged that there was people outside of themselves on the earth, living, breathing, walking, and talking. All right, so I want to now use this book here. This book here is entitled Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times. And on page 29, right, in this particular book, we see something interesting. It says the following, all right? We may describe the typical Asiatic man of the early 3rd millennium BC as bearded with long braided hair confined by a fillet and falling behind the ears. Braided hair, long beard. Now, for those who may be aware, that sounds like the average Hebrew Israelite brother inside of one of the camps in description. All right? So just want to sit there and make that point. Next, for edification purposes, have this book here entitled Hebrewisms of West Africa. Now, we're going to go in this book right here and go, if you will, to page 292. All right? So we can gain some understanding concerning this kind of matter. As stated, not going to be doing much teaching, but just want to sit there and make this point to be noted. It says this: John Aldrich, Master of His Majesty's Revels in the Kingdom of Ireland, published in 1679 a volume on Africa, wherein he speaks of the coast of Guinea as follows. Now, those who may know, Guinea is in Western Africa. Many Jews also have scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Others are what? Asian strangers who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans, the Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else as came out of Europe, whence they were banished, etc. Now, that right there just goes to show you, in Hebrewisms of West Africa, that they had what they might have considered in the Gambia, what they call Asian refugees. Now, the Gambia people at that time were all people of color, the indigenous people of Africa and those who escaped out of the land of Israel during the Roman Empire. So that's why I wanted to go in that particular reference book, in that particular subject. All right, for the last thing we're going to read in the book, I have this book here. It's a rare book to get. It's entitled The Lost Jews, Last of the Ethiopian Falashas. This is written by a guy named Rappaport. Now, he gets into this subject by saying this. He is quoting the guy in a historian world named Eldad the Danite, saying the following. The tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher left Assyria after the death of Sennacherib in 681 BCE and journeyed to the land of the gold, Ethiopia, Eldad reported. So in your own time, you can actually get this book and read furthermore into it. So that just go to show you different references of the fact that you had people of the Western Asian people that went into Africa. So that's enough with the reading. Just want to sit there and go over that aspect. Next, we're going to go over in this Library Challenge Part 2 concerning other types of subject matters concerning books that we as Israelites read and quote, all right, for edification purposes. I have a book here entitled Columbus, The Four Voyages, all right? And this right here just gets into his particular history, and it even speaks about how he was arrested by the natives, all right, when they was trying to bring captives over to Spain. Next we have here is a book concerning Thomas Jefferson. He was the third president of the United States. So this right here is a very good book. A lot of historians who's heavy into history get into this right here. So as the brother Daniela spoke about what they call the Negro repellent, we need not to try to do that because we still speak in English and we know that it was a crime for our people to read. So we need to sit there and get our reading up and get your pens and pads if that's your particular subject. Next we got here is a book called Tacitus. He was a Roman historian, all right? And this gets into this particular subject, all right? Tacitus, the Histories. I cite this book periodically once it comes down into teaching, all right? Next I have here is a book by the historian Plutarch, Volume 2. This is during the time when he was living during the Roman Empire. All right. And this book right here is very, very influential once it comes down to knowing history to a certain extent. That being Volume 2. This here being Volume 1, Plutarch Lives. All right. So as we were able to see, there's a Part 2 and a Part 1. All right. So just want to sit there and have that to be noted for edification purposes. Next list we got here, written by Sir Alan Gardiner, is a book called Egypt of the Pharaohs. And this right here, needless to say, is used by Israelites basically because wanting to sit there and disprove some of the understandings that they have, talking about there were no slaves in Egypt that were Israelites and so forth and so on. So yeah, we do get our studying done, and you will notice, not to sound belligerent, haughty, or arrogant, when you sitting up there getting your studying done, a lot of people don't want to challenge you. They try to change the subject, all right? Because they're too ashamed to sit there and have to admit, perhaps, wow, I need to study something too. Okay, next we got here is the Oxford History. This is the same Oxford University that Malcolm X actually spoke in. This book doesn't really speak about Malcolm X, but it just gets into the fact of Oxford University, which is over in England. They publish a lot of books in history, and this is one of them, all right? This is edited by Ian Shaw. Next, we got the Oxford History of Greece and the Hellenistic World. I use this as a reference book in the school that I teach in. All right, going over Greco-Roman history and everything like that. This book gets into the time before Alexander and going all the way through until the time of the Ptolemies. All right, so let that be noted and understood. All right, for the next list that we're going to be dealing with in this particular subject, have a book here entitled Documents of West Indian History. I love this author. May he rest in peace. His name is Eric Williams. All right, with a introduction by Edward Scobie or Scobie. Pardon me if I mispronounced the man's name. And this right here gets into the fact of the writings of Columbus and the writings of others. This is the first time when I first read this book is when I first understood about the guy they call Bartolome de las Casas and how he, when he saw what was going on with the native Indians or the native people in that land in the Caribbean, he decided that it was a better idea to go all the way to Western Africa and pick people up. So just want to sit there and have that to be noted in that. This right here I use for reference purposes when you're trying to sit there and get your history up. This right here denounces the fact of there being anything called the Atlantic slave trade because it gets into the slave trade that was going on inside of what we call the United States. So this right here, written by David McClough, sits there and shows exactly what that book is about, 1776, and what they call the American Emancipation. So, my point in going over those particular things is just to let it be noted, shown and understood of getting your studying up and not being tunnel visioned. You understand? Just want to sit there and have that to be noted for edification purposes. Next we have, brothers and sisters, I like to call this one here a little friend of mine in the book world. This is called The History of Ancient Israel by Michael Grant. This is a picture that they say is of Ezra from the biblical era, but this was painted during the time of the Byzantine people. All right, so just let that to be noted and understood. The guy looks like he's of color. At least to me, that looks like an afro, to me at least, in the beginning of what you call twist. You know, when they're trying to get their hair locked or to get their hair twisted or something, or maybe what they call miniature box braids. At least that's what that looks like to me. All right, so just want to sit there and have that to be shown. Next, we have the very famous book, if we will. This book here is entitled Roots by Alex Haley. All right, just want to sit there for edification purposes, have this to be shown. Now, in this book right here on chapter 107, this particular page here being 771, I want to read part of what the author here says was an ideal conversation that they was having during the time of the Lincoln administration when President Lincoln was in office. All right, and in this particular book right here, here is what we see. It says this: well, I don't care what these white folks says, declared Matilda. Master Lincoln doing good for us if he get them so upset. Fact mo I hear about him sound me he like Moses trying to free us children of Israel. According to this, a slave conversation ideally would have went by saying that Lincoln, in their own way of saying he's like Moses, trying to free who? Us, children of Israel. Brothers and sisters, don't be under the impression that our people, even during the enslavement time, did not know who in the world we were. All right, so let that be noted and understood. All right, we're going to get into that in further presentations, but just want to sit there and have that shown. Next we got here is a book entitled American Slavery, American Freedom by Edmund S. Morgan. This book gets into the fact of what was going on in the colonial period. Now, when they had the colonies, some of the colonies like Virginia being in 1607, Massachusetts in 1638, Pennsylvania in 1681, some of those colonies that we were speaking of when they established themselves as colonies, that's what this book right here gets into in a particular history of that. Next we have here, is a book called Black Culture and Black Consciousness. So this is written by Lawrence Levine. Now, I want to go for edification purposes, if we will, in this book right here on page 41, so we can sit there and see something else concerning this kind of matter, all right? Because it goes to show you our people were not atheists when we was brought over here as captives. Word to the wise is sufficient. It says this: even here the slaves were often discovered by the white patrols. Then they were rushing and start whipping and beating the slaves unmerciful. West Turner of Virginia reported, and do you know what some of them devils were mean and sinful enough to say? Goes on saying this: if I catch you here serving God, I'll beat you. You ain't got no time to serve God. We brought you to serve us. So I just want to sit there and have that to be noted and shown that this is coming from the book entitled Black Culture and Black Consciousness, in which a slave was actually speaking about how they would be beaten if they were caught praying. So our people were not atheists when we was being brought over here and while we was here in captivity. So let that be noted. Now, this book here is a very useful book for edification purposes. This one is entitled Ethiopia and the Missing Link in African History. This book right here basically, brothers and sisters, gets into the fact of saying, when you get into it, it speaks about how the Israelites in that book here called Jews were the people who branched off from the greater black population and formed their own kingdom. It doesn't speak as Chancellor Williams attempts to do, trying to sit there and say that the Jews of old was white. So let that be noted. Now, this book right here is a book, may my mother rest in peace. She used to have this book by the same title, in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. This book was actually suggested to her from a person that actually is from the school from One West. So this book right here is very, very influential. And if you want a good timeline about the Romans, emperors and everything, this has it. Next, we have a very controversial book, 100 Years of Lynchings by Ralph Ginsburg. Now, unfortunately, the stains you see there is something that I spilt there when I was drinking something. All right, but just want to sit there and have this to be shown. 100 Years of Lynchings by Ralph Ginsburg. And he gets into the history of what happened from newspaper articles concerning our enslavement. Actually, after our enslavement, when we were being hung from trees and so forth and so on. Want to sit there and give a shout out to my brother Nasir Yashubel. This book here is entitled Ancient Science of Love. All right, this is a book that a brother wrote. It's on Amazon, and I suggest for those who are interested to patronize the brother and look him up by this name, Nasir Yashubel, on Amazon. All right, so let that be noted. Next, I have a book here. This book here is entitled A History of Rome. Now, this is very, very useful if you do care about the Roman Empire and wanting to know the history concerning that. So it gets into what happened with the god Diocletian and Maximilian and the separation of what they call the Byzantine Empire, which is the Roman Empire of the East, and the Western, quote-unquote, Holy Roman Empire. So just want to sit there and have that to be shown for edification purposes. Next, we have a very controversial book. Some like it, some don't, but it is what it is. Everyone's not going to like everything. This book right here is entitled Pharaohs and Kings, A Biblical Quest. So this right here gets into by David Rohl, who's actually an agnostic, come to find out. And he attempts to sit there and state that the chronology that's given in ancient Egypt in the standard is incorrect, and that the years need to be shortened to fit in with the correct timeline by several hundred years. So that's what this particular author gets into in this light. I cite this book on Maccabees TV in a video I did with the brother Priest Danyala. Next, the cover is off, okay? But we want to sit there and show this book from the name on the side. It is called Slavery and the Making of America. And that book right here showed the historical fact that even in what we call the borough of Brooklyn in New York had what we call slaves. All right, so New York was a slave state. So just want to sit there and have that to be shown for edification purposes.